last box was taped shut at 11:04 in the morning. I know because I was watching the clock instead of her face, which is what I had been doing since 8. Clara set down the tape gun. She looked at the 6 boxes stacked by the front door. Not many boxes, for 2 years of a life. And somehow, that made it worse. She looked at the apartment the way you look at things you are not certain you will see again. Then she picked up her keys. That is when she stopped. That is when she set them back down. That is when Clara Santos, my roommate, my closest friend, the person who had reorganized my kitchen 3 times without being asked, walked back across the hallway and kissed me. Not quickly. Not by accident, like someone who had been carrying the decision for a very long time and had simply run out of reasons to wait. She stepped back. She picked up her keys again. I probably should have done that sooner, she said. She was not wrong. My name is Daniel Holt. I am 32. I draft structural layouts for a civil engineering firm downtown, the kind of work that sounds more interesting than it is at dinner parties, and more important than people assume after an earthquake. I live on the 4th floor of a building with a slow elevator and a landlord who treats working by Friday as a non-binding estimate. I run 3 miles every Saturday morning and undo it immediately with a large coffee and the news, which is a failure pattern I have maintained for years with great commitment. I am not, by nature, someone who says the important thing at the correct moment. Clara Santos understood this about me before I fully understood it myself. She was 29. She designed brand identities for small businesses, logos, color systems, the kind of visual work that requires real taste and the patience to explain to clients why the font they picked is wrong. She had dark hair she kept in a loose braid that fell apart by noon every single day. She had a laugh that started before she meant it to, a sharp, involuntary breath before the real thing arrived, as though her own amusement surprised her, and she owned a small orange succulent she had bought at the farmer's market on our first shared weekend in the apartment, which she kept on the kitchen windowsill where it had absolutely no business surviving, and which she had kept alive for 2 years through aggressive optimism and extremely irregular watering. That succulent outlasted 4 of her work contracts, 2 decisions she refused to call mistakes, and, eventually, us as a category. We met through an online listing with 4 blurry photos and the phrase professionals preferred. She arrived 20 minutes early to the viewing. The building manager had already let her in. When I got there, she was standing in my kitchen reorganizing my cutlery drawer, not her drawer. Mine. The forks were with the spatulas, she said when she saw me, as if this explained everything, and also as if we had already agreed she lived here. I gave her the room 2 weeks later. We shared the apartment for 2 years after that, efficiently, carefully, and with the quiet understanding that the arrangement worked exactly as well as it did, and neither of us would benefit from asking it to do more than it was doing. I was very committed to that framing. It did not survive move-out morning. The job offer came on a Tuesday in March. She told me in the kitchen at 7:30, sitting cross-legged on the counter with the orange succulent beside her and her laptop open to an email she had clearly been rereading for 20 minutes. The room smelled like coffee and that particular quality of quiet that comes just before something shifts. The position was in Portland. Creative director at a branding studio she had mentioned twice in the past year, which with Clara meant she had been thinking about it constantly. The salary was real. The title was real. The studio had a reputation. Clara, I said, that is an extraordinary opportunity. She held my gaze for 1 second longer than felt necessary. Yeah, she said. That was the entire conversation. I told myself it was a good thing, that adults take opportunities when they arrive. That Portland was 3 hours by plane, which is not the end of the world, which is a manageable distance, which is something people handle without incident. I told myself this in March. I told myself this in April. In May, the boxes came out. Move out was a Saturday. I woke at 6:15. I never wake at 6:15 on Saturdays, and lay there for 40 minutes before accepting that sleep was not coming back. Through the wall I could hear her, the hollow sound of drawers being opened, tape being pulled from a roll, the rhythm of someone packing who is trying not to think too carefully about what they are packing away. I went downstairs. The kitchen held the smell of coffee she had already made. Morning light came through the window at an angle that caught the succulent on the sill and threw a thin orange shadow across the counter. I made a full pot. I sat and waited. She came downstairs at 8 in her moving clothes, the old university sweatshirt she only wore for practical tasks, jeans with paint on the left knee, her braid already falling apart. She had flat boxes under one arm and a marker in her hand. She stopped in the kitchen doorway and looked at the room the way she had been looking at everything that morning. "Full pot," she said. "Saturday," I said. She poured a cup. She sat at the table. We drank coffee the same way we had drunk it 600 mornings in that kitchen, and neither of us said a single thing worth saying. That landed differently than it should have. I want to tell you I handled the rest of that morning with dignity and composure. I did not. I helped her carry boxes to the car because at some point it became inevitable without either of us deciding it. 3 trips in the slow elevator. The building manager waved from his doorway. He had known Clara for a long time. He did not say anything either. By 11 there was 1 box left. The kitchen box. I knew because the edge of the orange succulent was visible through the top, wrapped in paper that had not quite held. I stood at the edge of the hallway and looked at the room and told myself the reasonable thing. People move. People take jobs in other cities. The particular angle of morning light through this kitchen window, and the specific coffee she made, and the way her laugh started wrong. None of these things were things I had arranged my entire daily life around. I had poor survival instincts around Clara Santos specifically. That was all. What I will tell you now is that I had known, for some time, that this was not the accurate version. There had been signs. There had been several unmistakable signs. I had, with considerable skill and dedication, misread every single one of them. The first was the dinner. 3 weeks before move out, she made pasta, not the quick version she assembled on weeknights, but the real kind, sauce that simmered for an hour, bread baked in the cast iron, the apartment filling by 6:30 with a smell so particular and so hers that I cannot encounter it now without a problem I will not describe here. She had done this on a Wednesday evening, for no stated reason, with wine she had bought and not mentioned buying. We ate at the kitchen table until midnight and talked about nothing that mattered very much. And the whole evening had the quality of something she had planned and then decided not to explain. I told myself she was stress cooking, that packing anxiety takes different forms, that this was a completely ordinary thing for 2 people who lived together to do on a Wednesday. I did not ask why she had made the good pasta. The second was the photograph. She had 1 framed print on her bedroom wall, taken on a weekend we had spent up the coast the previous August, at a lighthouse, by a stranger who had held the camera slightly wrong. It was a photograph of the 2 of us. She had printed it, framed it, hung it on her wall where she saw it every morning for 7 months. And the days before move out, everything else came down. The art prints, the calendar, the small chalkboard, all of it went into boxes and the photograph stayed up. I walked past her open door the night before move-out, and the frame was still there, and behind it was a square of lighter paint where everything else had been. She packed it last. On the morning itself, I noticed. I said nothing. The third was the phone call. The week before move-out, I was working at the kitchen table with my headphones in when one earbud dropped, and I realized the music had been lower than I thought, and I could hear her in the hallway. Her voice was low the way it went when she was not quite trying to be private, but also not quite trying to be heard. I heard, "I know, Jess." Then, "It's not that simple." Then a pause long enough to mean the other person had said something she was choosing how to answer. Then, quieter, because saying it out loud doesn't change where the job is. She heard me shift my chair. She moved around the corner. I heard nothing more. I sat there for 30 seconds. Then I replaced the earbud and told myself it was probably about logistics, about the entirely reasonable difficulties of relocating to another city, about any one of the ordinary things a person navigates when a significant change is approaching. That explanation was not correct. I had simply run out of better ones to try. And so the morning arrived. The boxes went down to the car. The kitchen box sat in the corner, with the succulent's paper wrapping coming loose at the top. Clara came back downstairs in her jacket, keys in hand. She looked at the apartment one final time. The walls, the window, the counter where the succulent had sat for 2 years. She walked to the windowsill. She picked it up. She set it carefully on top of the last box. She looked at me. We stood in that kitchen for a long moment. The room was quiet in the way a room goes quiet when the people inside it are aware of what is not being said. I could smell the cold coffee in our cups. I could hear someone in the apartment above us moving furniture, the slow drag of something heavy across bare floor. I looked at her. She looked at the box. Then she looked back at me. "It was a good 2 years," she said. Her voice came out steady. Almost, "It was a very good 2 years," I said. She nodded. She picked up the last box. She turned toward the door. I said her name. Not loudly. Not with any plan attached to it. Just her name. Because it was the only word I had left, and I was running out of time to use anything else. "Clara." She stopped. She turned around. She stood there in the doorway with the last of her life in a box under her arm and the orange succulent balanced on top, and she looked at me across the length of the hallway, and her expression was doing the thing it had been doing for weeks. Something between a question and an answer, waiting to see which one I was going to be. She set the box down. She came back. She stopped in front of me. She was looking at the collar of my shirt with the focused attention of someone selecting words very carefully. "There is something I have been carrying for a while," she said. I was going to leave without saying it. I decided in April that was the adult decision, and I told Jess, and she agreed with me. She paused. Jess was wrong. I did not move. I was very aware of my own hands. "You don't have to say anything," I said. "Whatever this is, you can walk out that door and we can text and call and it can be fine." She looked up at that. "No," she said. "It can't." She took one breath. "I changed your name in my phone," she said. "Twice. First time was about a year ago. I had you listed as Daniel H. There were 2 Daniels at the studio. And one night I changed it, and I am not going to tell you what I changed it to. The second time was 6 months ago. I changed it back because seeing it every time your name came up was making things worse, not better, and I had decided to be sensible." She stopped. The sensible version also did not work. That sentence did something quiet to the room. Something in my chest that had been accepting my explanations for 11 weeks stopped accepting them all at once. I thought about the Wednesday pasta. The photograph left on the wall until the very last morning. Her voice in the hallway, saying it doesn't change where the job is. Every almost something I had been telling myself was nothing. "Clara," I said. "You still have the exit," she said. Her voice had gone lower. "It's right there." "I am not going to take the exit," I said. She looked at me. Her fingers tightened once around the strap of her bag. Then she let go. "When something went well," I said, "you were who I wanted to tell first. When something went wrong, also you. Every time, for 2 years. I had your coffee cup and your jacket on my hook and the sound of your key in my door at night, and I called all of that having a good roommate, because it was a version I could live inside without changing anything. I was very good at the sensible version." I looked at her. I should have tried the honest one a long time ago. She was very still. "I watched you pack this apartment for 4 days," I said. And I had nothing to say, because I had spent 11 weeks telling myself the reasonable thing, which is that you have an extraordinary opportunity in another city, and that is the end of the sentence. "And the less reasonable version," she said. "That I should have said this a year ago," I said. "Or 2 years ago. Or the morning you reorganized my cutlery drawer." She laughed. The real one. The sharp breath before it. The way her whole face changed when it arrived, and she pressed her hand to her mouth, and her eyes were doing something closer to the surface than I had seen before. Then she stepped forward. She kissed me for the second time that morning, and this one was not rushed, and it was not by accident, and it did not need explaining. It was the kind of thing that had been true for a long time and was only now getting to be said properly. I held her face in both hands, and the apartment was very quiet, and the morning light was still coming through the kitchen window at that particular angle, and for the first time in 11 weeks I had absolutely nothing to tell myself. Her phone lit up in her jacket pocket. She pulled back. She looked at the screen. She made a face somewhere between embarrassment and laughter. "It's Jess," she said. "Tell her she was wrong," I said. "I will absolutely tell her that." She answered it. She turned around, one finger held up. I could hear her voice go into the particular register she used for Jess. Quick, slightly exasperated, already starting to laugh. "I know. Yes, I'm aware. Will you just... Jess, yes, he said it." She looked back at me over her shoulder. She was smiling like a person who had put down something heavy. "Yes, the whole thing." I picked up the last box. I looked at the orange succulent balanced on top. I carried it to the windowsill. I set it back in its spot, in the patch of light it had occupied for 2 years, in the place where it had lived through everything. The job was still in Portland. That part didn't change. What changed was that the conversation we hadn't had for 2 years finally got to be had. And once it was had, the other conversations could follow. About schedules, about flights, about what 2 people do with an unreasonable situation when they've already proved they can share a kitchen without incident. 3 months later, she was still in Portland. I had been there twice. She had been back once. We were doing something inconvenient, deliberately, which is the only version of this I would recommend. A year after that, she had acquired a second orange succulent for the Portland windowsill. Also somehow alive. I have stopped questioning her method. 2 years later, when people asked how we finally got together, she said I was the last one to understand what was happening. I said she came back for a box. We are both, technically, correct. The original succulent is still on my kitchen windowsill. She left it on purpose. I have kept it alive since then, which I consider a significant personal development. Nothing important arrived from nowhere on that Saturday morning in May. It had simply stopped being willing to wait. What would you have done if the person you lived with walked out the door before either of you said the true thing? And have you ever stayed quiet about something that mattered because the timing never felt exactly right? Tell me your story in the comments. If this one reached you, leave a like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.